My name is Mark. Welcome to our second running of the AI seminar. The focus of this seminar is to address how parents can use AI to help their child with schooling in a way that ensures the child builds up capability without making them reliant on the tools. This topic is really important. As parents, we need to understand that AI is here and we need to address it with our children. Like many topics nowadays, we can't rely on the school system to do it for us because we are the parents. It's our primary responsibility to educate them. The tools are free and accessible right now. I've seen numerous forums where children, school students, are talking about how they create multiple Gmail accounts to gain the free systems so that they can get even more inquiries, how they use it to do their assignments late at night. If we don't address it with our kids, they will be going down the path of least resistance in many instances, and that is not helpful for them. The challenge isn't stopping them, because we don't want to stop them. It's teaching them how to use the systems effectively, to turn it from a shortcut into something that supercharges their learning and makes them ready for the future. Okay, so the first thing I want to make really clear, because I can see a lot of hype in the media about it and a lot of misinformed commentary from supposed experts who are not really, and if you're in business, you'll see it a lot at board level down to senior management, middle management, etc., where people talk in a very uninformed way about what AI is. Now, it's easy to fall into the trap of thinking that these artificial intelligence systems actually have intelligence. I mean, they have the intelligence in the name, right? So that suggests that some thinking is going on. But it's important to understand that there is no thinking going on with these systems. They are not what are known as artificial general intelligence systems, which is the new terminology for when a system might reach the level of being able to be comparable to a human, or the other buzzword, which is beyond AGI, is artificial superintelligence. These systems that we're talking about, from ChatGPT, from Gemini, from Claude, Perplexity, Copilot, which is really built on ChatGPT, these are not those systems. They are not equivalent to us. They may seem better than us at times, but that's just simply a trick of the code. So if they're not thinking models, what are they? They're large language models. They are these systems trained on a large amount of data, and that data gives them a perspective that humans just can't fathom. And what that means is they use the data to make predictions. Now, the predictions are if the person, the human entering stuff into the keyboard, asks this question, what is likely to be the correct answer? Now, notice that what is likely, it's a probabilistic model. It's working out percentages based on all the trillions of data points they've got. If someone asks that question, it's most likely they want that answer. And that's how they give the answer. That's why they can be so accurate a lot of the time, but it's also why they can get it so horribly wrong at other points. So the key way to think about them is it's an autocomplete function. You ask a question and it tries to autocomplete the answer based on a statistical process that predicts by letter the right response. And so that gets back to the point I was making at the beginning. They don't understand. They simulate understanding and they appear to talk to you, and they encourage you to think of them as reasoning or thinking. In fact, sometimes that's even in the model names, but they simply don't think. They don't reason. And it's important that we teach our kids that they are not equivalent to us, and that we shouldn't just rely on them without any attempt to validate or verify what they're giving us, particularly because of this thing called hallucination, which is where the models make things up. Now, generally, it will do it around what we call edge cases, where either our prompt is not clear enough, or or it's being asked a question that it hasn't been able to find a set of source data on that it's been trained on. In those instances, it'll make it up. Now, as a lawyer, for instance, one of the key areas I could see that happening in the past was lawyers would go into the system and ask it to develop a legal argument, and the system would drop in a bunch of cases. Now, those cases didn't exist at all. So a number of lawyers, both in the primarily in the US, have been struck off, lost their ability to practice, because they just simply filed those documents thinking that the cases must have been correct, but they weren't. The model made it up because it knew the lawyer was looking for some evidence to support the argument and made up cases that seem to suit the circumstances. So it's a really key message that just because the AI presents a compelling case doesn't mean that it's actually correct. We have to validate or verify what it's saying to us. So let's have a look at what tools exist on the market. Now, this is not an exhaustive list of what's on the market, just to be really clear. It is some of the most common ones that you may be aware of. So most people will be aware of ChatGPT from OpenAI. That is still probably one of the major leaders in machine learning space. It has some real strengths. It's good at writing. It is good at reasoning in a rules-based way, not thinking, just reasoning through problems. And it has some degree of creativity. Now, what is creativity for an AI is the subject of a whole different workshop. So I'm not really going to get into it because we talk about changing responses based on this thing called temperature, which can do another workshop on that. One of the big weaknesses of GPT and the other systems is that it can hallucinate. It makes things up because they're trained to give answers. And when they can't find an answer, their training suggests that they should still give one. And that's why hallucinations happen. That's also part of the background training that they do, which is known as negative reinforcement training. So that's why they hallucinate. They don't have an answer. They've been trained to give answers, and they're trying to give the user what they think the user wants. The current model is GPT-5. It's rolled out across all systems, both free and paid tiers. If you're on the free tier, you're generally stuck with GPT-5. If you're doing paid, you can switch between models, and if you're using developer versions, you can actually pick the specific model. The paid versions are quite useful because they allow you to do longer prompts, they allow you to give more information to the system, and they give you more limits, because most of the free systems have this thing called rate limiting, where you can only do a certain number of prompts a day. Some prompts consume more of your entitlement. So back and forth with the system can use up a lot of your entitlement. And if you try and generate an image, you'll normally get one a day. So there's some real limitations, which is why people pay. Most of the systems in Australia, at least, are about $30 a month for the introductory system. There are some differences in the way that pays, though, and we'll talk about that for Gemini, because GPT, it pays for one user, but for Gemini, that's not necessarily the case. Let's talk about Gemini. That is the Google system. Some people who've got Android phones will be familiar with Gemini because it's now baked into the phones. It's very good with maths and research. It's not bad with writing, but it's not as good as GPT or Claude, for instance. It can sometimes be a bit wordy, although the current versions, which are 2.5, Flash and Pro, they are getting better. At times I find Gemini to have more succinct writing now than GPT, but it is always a toss-up. Now, you can tell even from that answer that I actually use both systems together. I use them to cross-check and to get the best of both. If you get a Gemini subscription, which is $33 a month, and you have Google family sharing, you'll find that that Gemini license shares across your entire family group if you've set up a family group in Google. Now, I have, and so my 4 children share that Gemini license, so they each get the pro usage of Gemini, which is quite affordable because it means by person then it's about $6, not $30. In addition, it means they get access to extended tools such as notebook LM, which we'll talk a little bit about later. Other tools include Claude, really good at coding, really good at writing. Sometimes it's a better writer than GPT and Gemini, but it has a very limited window of what we call memory, which is its ability to take in information and use it to converse with you. Gemini actually has the largest context window. GPT is not too bad, but it's about 250,000 tokens versus Gemini's 1 million. Claude is even more limited than GPT, so it makes it difficult to give it large amounts of data and say, have a look at that. Although when you do, if it fits within the context window, it's quite helpful. Perplexity is one that not a lot of people have heard of, but if you're doing academic work, Perplexity is one of the better models, not so much for writing, but for research. Perplexity will go and search academic resources, and it will produce a list of academic resources that can then be used for school. So I specifically include it here because it's very useful for students. I've just put this in for topicality. There's Grok from XAI, there's Meta AI from Meta. You could use any number of them, and most of them are trained on similar data sets. But for the purpose of this seminar, we're just going to look primarily at ChatGPT and Gemini. Like I said, all of them have free accounts. Some people get around the limitations on free by creating multiple Gmail accounts and swapping between them to get the additional benefits. I'll leave it to you as to which system or which approach you take, whether you take a subscription or you use multiple accounts, or whether you use multiple systems to spread your prompts across. I will say, as a shameless plug, that Demox Tutoring students get access to Gemini Education as part of their student subscription with us, and that means they get access to what people would otherwise be paying $33 a month for. So let's talk about prompting. Now, prompting is the process of asking a question or giving a task to a machine learning system. The important thing to take away is, like most things in life, if you give a system a garbage prompt, you will absolutely get garbage responses. Now, a lot of people will give very poorly considered prompts to the machine learning systems. And for most instances, that's okay, because the level of depth that they're needing a response at is superficial. So a poor prompt will still produce a reasonably accurate response, and particularly if it's a factual query, like what's the capital of France. But as you're starting to try and tap into reasoning, or as you're trying to get feedback on something, the prompt, the ask of the system is particularly important. And if you don't ask correctly, you won't be getting value out of it. So our next step in the journey tonight is to have a look at the do's and don'ts of prompting at a very high level. And this is the bit I said that you could take away even in your own practice for work. So an example of a bad prompt is where someone just says, tell me about X, whether it's World War II or something else. On the other hand, an example of a good prompt in that context is on the right side. So you tell the system to act as a history tutor for a student, and then you ask the system to explain 3 main causes of World War II, and then you give it some directions as to the format. And so you can begin to see in the presentation that it's almost broken up into parts. This first part tells it a role to play. This second part gives it the task itself. And the third part gives it the format that you want it to produce for you. So that is a reasonably well-structured prompt. And you can see then from this slide that what it does is it follows what's known as a CPRF format. Now, you don't always need to use the 4 elements, but it's a good idea to get it in your head. And what that stands for is context, persona, request, and format. So on the right side is an example of a CPRF prompt. You can see it has these things here, these angled brackets. We call them XML tags. You don't have to use it, but if you've got someone in your workplace or someone that you know that's reasonably proficient in machine learning systems, you will see that whether they're using the XML prompt or not, they're doing things like putting in bold letters, context, task, role. And the reason for that is machine learning systems are quite precise. And the more you can the more you can break apart what you're giving them, the better they'll be at giving your response closer to what you're looking for. So in this instance, the angled brackets, the XML tags, are used to tell it, here is something, pay attention, and then it goes to the next section. This produces the better outcome when you're prompting rather than just writing a whole block of text. And part of the reason for it is this trend, even in the latest models, such as Gemini 2.5 and GPT-5, the tendency for machine learning systems to forget the middle. So you give it a whole block of text and it pays attention to the start. It somehow tunes out the middle bit and then remembers the last bit. To avoid that forgotten middle bit, the tags concentrate its attention and break up the prompt for it so that it's able to logically follow it. So let's break this prompt up. So in the context, we're telling it, who am I? So we're saying, I'm a Year 12 student studying business studies. So we're giving it a context. We're telling it the level it may need to respond to. Then we give it a persona. Persona is just a phrase for the role. You could use role there as well. You're telling it, I want you to pretend to be something. And now this is useful if you're at work, for instance. You might say, if you're writing marketing copy for work, you might say, act as an expert marketing copywriter. And you can see how you tell it to change the role. So when it's producing responses, it's tapping into its database of how would this type of person respond to this prompt. Once we tell it the background, the context, we tell it the role it's meant to play, we can then give it the task. And we break the task into two parts, what I want you to do and how I want you to format it. So the request, please provide feedback on my essay about quality management. And then the format, we tell it how to set it out. In this prompt, and this is an example of a prompt that a student in Year 12 business studies could give a system, you can see that the students identified they're in Year 12 and then they're giving the system, by uploading a file, both the essay and the rubric, which is the marking guide for how to assess it. Now, if you gave a system a prompt like this with the rubric and with the essay, it will produce a reasonably accurate piece of feedback for the student to enable them to work on their next draft. We'll talk more about using systems to do essay marking in a few slides' time, but this at least sets the scene for how we can be using it with a good prompt to get a good outcome from the system. So the core takeaways: CPRF, context, persona, role, and request, and format. XML tags, not necessary, but some form of signpost to the system as to what you want it to do. For GPT particularly, especially with GPT-5, if you're on the free version, you'll want to tell it when you need it to think carefully, because the new model no longer has a model picker unless you're paying for it. And what that meant in the past, you used to be able to say, no, I want to use the fast one, or I want you to use the one that thinks longer. But the new model on free simply takes your request, and there's in the background a system that's going, is this something I need to spend more time on, less time on, or whatever? And it makes the decision. Now, because the system wants to be cheap, because it costs money and compute, it will normally default to the simple model. You don't necessarily want that. So if you want the system on the free model of GPT-5 to do more thinking, to give a better reasoned response, you need to specifically say to it, please think carefully, or please spend some time and consider. And if you want to go one step further, you can say, please consider carefully and look for second order consequences. That will tell it when it starts to process it that this requires the thinking model. And you'll know that it's doing it because it'll take up to 40 to 60 seconds to process your request. So let's take prompting one step further. Sometimes you won't really know how to say what you want to do properly, and it may be a complex task. And because the systems are quite precise, and the better you can prompt it on the first prompt, it's called one-shotting, the better you can give it the prompt at the start, the better the response, the less it makes stuff up. What you might do is give your idea to the system in a new chat and say, help me write the prompt for a machine learning system. And then when it generates the prompt, you copy that and start a new prompt and then paste that prompt in. We do that because studies have shown that if your initial prompt is not very clear and you have to go back and forth with the system to clarify, then the system drops from accuracy at around 85% on average on the latest state-of-the-art tools down to about 60% after about 5 back and forths. So it's very important to get your prompt right. So in this example, you can see color-coded different elements of a prompt where I'm saying to the system, okay, I want you to work as an expert prompt engineer. That's the persona or role. I want you to get the system to do something for me. Here's the task. I want it to create flashcards. And then I also tell it, only proceed, only generate something if you are 99% confident, which makes the system think. It tries not to hallucinate, it double checks what it's doing, and then it gives you a proper prompt. So if you're uncertain how to prompt the system to get a good outcome, use a prompt like this to get it to write the prompt for you. That is best practice for prompting. Now, let's move from prompting, where we've been learning about how to ask the right question to get the right answer and avoid putting garbage into the system and getting garbage out of it. Now we move to how can we use some prompts. So the first one, we start off easy, and it's called, we're going to use the system to do something called the Feynman technique. Now, this is named after Professor Feynman in the United States, who's a polymath and very good at explaining. And in essence, you can summarize what he says down to as, explain it to me like I'm a 5-year-old. So the methodology here is used when you don't understand something, and so you ask the system to explain it to you. So let's have a look at the prompt. We say, persona, act as a patient science tutor who uses the Feynman technique. Then we ask it, we give it its task. I want you to explain fertilization in mammals in simple language, as if to a 10-year-old. And then we just give it some formatting requirements for British English, which is the Australian standard. So in this instance, I've picked a year 12 biology syllabus dot point from the first module of year 12, which is mod 5. And assume your child came to you and said, I don't understand fertilization, and you didn't even do biology. Well, with the Feynman technique, with a prompt like this, you can have the system teach the concept simply. So let's have a look at how that works in practice. And this is where we get to a live demo, and hopefully I get it right. Okay, so Feynman there. So I'm going to go first to Gemini. So I'm in a paid version of Gemini, which all of the Demux students get when they become a student. So this is a little bit more. I just paste my prompt in and I get it to start processing it. Notice with this model, because it's running off the Pro, which is the thinking model, it's telling me what it's doing at each stage of the process. And here it goes. Gemini is a little bit more wordy than GPT, so it's broken it up a little bit further. But you can notice the level of language is quite simple. It's broken it up into stages, and it's told you what happens at the end. And notice now it's asked me a question to test my understanding. We can do the same in GPT-5. So if we do that, you'll notice that the outcome is a little different when GPT-5 generates it compared to Gemini. Both will be correct, but both of them give slightly different emphasis. So usually when I'm trying to understand something, I will use both systems to cross-check against each other. And so you can see again that they've all used analogy, which is at the core of the Feynman technique, to explain it. So that's our first example. Your child comes to you and asks you to explain a concept which you either don't remember or you don't know how to break down. Your go-to now is to use a prompt like the one on the screen to generate a response that you can use with your child. Now, I should have said at the beginning, actually, don't worry too much about the prompts that I'm giving tonight, because we will send after the presentation both a link to this recording, as well as, which will be on YouTube, as well as the slide deck itself. So you can copy those prompts or look at them whenever you want. So don't be too concerned if someone's taking down notes. You will get the slide deck. So in this example, we've got a summary of a topic we didn't understand. Now let's flip it around. We think we understand the topic, but we want to test ourselves. So you can reverse the Feynman technique and instead ask the system to test you on it. So in this example, again, we have the persona. Whoops, just trying to draw that. So we have the persona, act as a curious 10-year-old student. Task, I'm going to explain the concept of photosynthesis to you. After I explain it, ask me a simple question that was unclear. Now, notice that that's a deceptively simple prompt, but it's asking the system to pretend to be someone who shouldn't have knowledge, to listen to the explanation, to identify if there's anything a little unclear, and then to reflect that back to the student. So once your student has learned concept and you want to test for depth of understanding, the most effective way to test for understanding is to have someone teach it back. So this prompt would allow you to use a system to do that. Another pro tip here is most of the systems now have audio functions in the system where you can speak to the system, and they can even, some of them have live modes. So Gemini has that, so too does GPT. That allows a very natural back and forth as if you're talking to a person. It's an invaluable study tool for a student to say to the system, I'm going to explain a concept, you act like this person and test me on whether my explanation is accurate or whether it was deficient in some way. So we can take the Feynman technique to both understand the topic, but then to flip it to test ourselves on a topic. And the student can do it without us even having to help them. Okay, so we've gone from using prompts to understand things to now using prompts to help us write an essay. Now, this one looks very daunting. This is the prompt here, but it'll make sense in a second, so bear with me. One of the common problems I've experienced with my own boys, and they're boys, and as the recent NAPLAN shows us, 50% of boys in grade 5 and grade 9 cannot write at strong level. And strong is actually the sound level in the NAPLAN. So many boys, but even 33% of females are unable to write effectively. So if you give them an essay question, they find it very daunting and they don't know where to start, so they procrastinate it. Now, it's at that point that they're at risk of using an ML system now to just shortcut, and that does not help them for the future. Certainly, if we want them to go to university, they need to be able to critically think. They need to be able to write, and to write authentically in their own words. So when they're stuck with that blank page in front of them, just the essay question, sometimes it can help to say to them, okay, I don't want you to write the full essay because that can be hard and then everyone second guesses what they're writing. What I want you to do instead is give me what we call a scaffold. Now, a scaffold is just an outline of the essay. Now, even that can be tough for a student. So you can break it down even simpler and say, right, tell me what your thesis is. What thesis is just the fancy way of saying your main argument. Tell me what your main argument is. And then tell me the 3 paragraphs you will use to support that argument. What are the 3 sub-arguments that build your case? And if they can say that to you verbally, then they can use this prompt. Now, in this example, we're telling the system to act as a writing coach for Year 12 English. And we're telling it that we are writing an essay for Macbeth on his downfall. We then tell it, so that was the persona. Notice I'm not using the angled brackets here. Don't have to use them. It's just a way of thinking. Then we tell it more about the task. So we've moved from the persona to the task itself. Use CTEAL, which is a particular methodology used in English essays. Use the CTEAL method to set out a dot point scaffold for me. And then this is coming from the student here. So we've gotten our child to talk to us about what their argument's going to be. That's their thesis. So they think that Macbeth is about overwhelming ambition leading to individuals ignoring their moral principles. Then we say, okay, well, how are you going to prove that in your body paragraphs? What are the arguments you're making? And they go, okay, paragraph 1, I'm going to talk about ambition and spiritual corruption. Paragraph 2, I'm going to talk about how power can lead to corruption. And paragraph 3, how principles can, corruption of principles can lead to psychological consequences. So that's their argument, right? We make them do that work and that thinking, and then we give it the format response. So we say, look, I want you to use academic tone. I want you to give me some quotes, and you've got to tell me where the quotes come from. So that's a test to make sure it doesn't hallucinate and make up stuff. And you should show me how the paragraphs support the critical thinking. So if that's the prompt, let's test it. So we're going to again do another live test. Bear with me a sec as I grab that prompt. Remember, our child wrote the thesis, the paragraph 1, 2, and 3. So we give it to the system. Now, I don't think it thought very long about that, so I've not prompted it to think heavily. Now, it's just repeated your child's thesis, so it's not made up its own. It then breaks up the paragraphs for you using CTEAL. And notice what it's doing now. It's giving some quotes to help with the references. Whoops, I should have been sharing that. Let's start again. So it's generated the response. There's the thesis that the child has come up with. There is the child's argument for paragraph 1 in a statement there. But now it gives the child some additional help. It explains the great chain of being as one of the key cultural factors that impact the story that's happening in Macbeth. It gives some quotes to support it. It identifies the techniques that Shakespeare uses to accentuate that theme. It talks about what the effect is, it evaluates it, and then it links it back to the essay. That's CTEAL in brief. Notice how it's taken our child's argument and it's broken it down now into those paragraphs. Now, this is the bit that we need to tell our child not to fall into the trap of. ChatGPT is very helpful. It'll try and write it for you. Of course, the child needs to not do that, because if the child uses an AI system to generate its response, they will be breaching NES's All My Own Work policy, and that is otherwise known as plagiarism. They can be barred from the HSC itself. It's academic misconduct. Same as when you're at university, you can be denied graduation for that. So we use the system with a detailed prompt. We've made our child do the work first to just at least give us a sentence on each of their arguments, and it's helped flesh it out for them. That's one way we can use it to help write an essay. Another way, we're not going to do this prompt, we've just repeated the prompt there as the context. Another way is to say to the system, I want you to help me explore this theme. Can you test me on how this theme shows in the text, and have it point me to acts and scenes? And that way it's a dialogue between the student and the machine learning system to help the student develop the skill to be able to put things into their own words. That one would take more time, so we will skip it, but it is a different way of approaching the scaffold approach. Okay, now once your child has a scaffold, they may, it's tempting for them to start writing the essay, but again, you can say to them, stop, because again, one of the things that students do very poorly is they don't stop to evaluate, and writing long form responses, essays, requires you to be very clear in answering the question asked. Now, when you look at an essay topic, in the HSC, there are certain descriptor words used in the questions. Those descriptor words are not made up, and nor do they necessarily have the meaning you think they do. Those words are taken from something called the NESA glossary terms. The NESA glossary terms are a set of standard descriptors that the schools all use in order to get a common understanding of how you would answer a question. So I've just got the glossary terms up now here from the New South Wales government site. So for instance, if you see the word analyze used in an essay, what the marker is asking you to do is to identify components in the relationship and to draw out and relate the implications. So if a student doesn't do both of those things, they are not analyzing according to the NESA glossary terms. So it's important that before the child starts writing, that they stop and assess whether their scaffold, whether their outline is actually answering the question. And this is where this prompt can come in. We can give our scaffold to the system and say, does it actually answer it? So in this example, I've used the angled brackets again for XML markup just to make it clear what I'm doing. So the persona act as an experience English marker, context, use the NESA marking language. So that's telling it to go and use the glossary terms. The task is to evaluate my scaffold, and the output is to give me a summary. So let's see how that works. Now I do have a rubric that I can use against. Rubric is just the marking guidelines that the school will use. All assignments will come with a rubric, so you should be able to break that apart from the student's work, from the assignment itself, and upload that as well. So let's assume our student has done a scaffold and we've got the rubric. We would go back to our system. I will copy the response there. We'll start a new chat. Normally I do use new chats in order to stop the system getting less accurate. So I'm going to do a heading scaffold, and then I'm going to paste my essay. I'm just going to, or my scaffold, sorry. And then I'm going to go back to my prompt where I'm going to ask it to evaluate the work. So I've just pasted that in. Now I've got to give it the rubric, right? So I upload a file, and there's my rubric here. Now you may just have it as a PDF. It doesn't matter. I've just put it in a type of file. Once that uploads, we've got everything we need. We've got our rubric, I've given it its prompt, and we've got the scaffold that we copied from our other chat. Now let's see what happens when we generate them. So now it's thinking about it, and it tells us that that's a competent and well-structured response from what it can tell. Now remember, it's only got the scaffold, so it doesn't have the full writing. It was told to give us a detailed response, and it was told also to give us an HSC mark range. So those marks are in what are called bands. So it's told us this is looking like a band 5 response, and the upper half of band 5, which would be around 85 to 89%. So that's the mark out of 20 it's saying. It tells you what was good about the scaffold, and it tells you where the student needs to do a little bit more work. Now notice it hasn't actually identified how to write that, because our prompt hasn't asked it to do that. It's just asked it to tell it to assess what we've given it, and that's exactly what we want to do. So then we want to send our child away to say, have a think about those suggestions. How can you build those suggestions into your draft scaffold? And when you're confident with that, then go and write the response. So you can see here we use, even before the student starts to write, we can test how good their response is going to be at a high level. Now remember, the AI systems are mechanistic and they're statistical, so they're just going to be guesstimating what they think the mark will be. I can guarantee you that the mark will not be accurate, not fully. It'll be off by around 10 to 15%. And why do I say that? Well, for a few reasons, not the least of which is I've been testing this in checking my own writing when I'm doing my Masters of Teaching. And what happens when humans use rubrics is they hardly ever give full marks against each of the rubric criteria, which means you're always leaking some marks, whereas a machine learning system says thinks very binary. Is that there or is it not there? And if it's there, it's 100%. If it's not there, it falls back. But humans don't think that way. They tend to shy away from giving full marks. The students are losing marks at every point of the rubric, which is why if the system says it's a 95% response, it's likely to be an 85% response. It's not that the system's wrong, it's that humans mark in a different way. So just bear that in mind. The student shouldn't pin all their hopes that their response is going to get top marks, but it will be accurate within 10 to 15% on an absolute percentage basis. So far, we've used the machine learning system to help us develop a scaffold. Then we've tested our scaffold against the rubric. In the final step, we can submit our essay to the system and have it mark it. So the full essay now, the child has gone away, they've taken their scaffold and they've written the whole response. The prompt that you could use to test that is persona again, act as an experienced New South Wales HSC marker, context, use the official NESA glossary terms to assess the attached essay. So we attach the essay. Task, I want you to give me an overall mark and assessment, then comment on each rubric criterion. So we're telling it to break the rubric down and comment on each of them so we can see where we're losing our marks. And then give me specific feedback on each paragraph. So notice how precise that is. Give me a holistic mark, then break the rubric down and tell me where I'm losing my marks. Then I want you to give me paragraph by paragraph feedback. Now, this is what a good tutor will be doing. But if for some reason you're unable to access a tutor and the child is not able to get feedback from a school teacher, probably because they're doing it at 10 o'clock at night on a Sunday night before the assignment's due, then this type of prompt will help them break down and understand where they might be losing marks. The final part of the prompt just gives the output that we want it to do, and it gives the format for a British English. We'll always be using British English. If we don't tell it to do that, it'll default to American English. Standard Australian English is similar is identical in spelling to British English, even if the pronunciation or phonetics are different. So that's part 3 of using a machine learning system to do essays. Now that can be used at every step of high school, from year 7 all the way up to the HSC. In fact, they could be using that at university to also help them write their essays. So let's move away now from written form of essays to now study mode. So I'm going to introduce Notebook LM. Now, much like those chefs on TV, I've already prepared something before, but this is a very effective tool for helping our children study. So let's have a look at it. It is a Google service, so you do get some free access to it by default in your Gmail account. If you've got the Gemini subscription, you get access to the paid version of Notebook, which gives you far more functionality. If you're with Deluxe Tutoring, you also get access to Gemini for Education as part of your subscription. So let's have a look at what it does. We need to, where did Notebook go? Ah, that's right. It is here. Share this tab. Now, this is Notebook that I've set up. Now I've taken, let's assume your child has got notes for each of the 4 Year 12 modules for Year 12 business studies. So the modules are operations, marketing, finance, and human resources. You upload those against a notebook, you create a new notebook, you add the notes to it. The thing about Notebook LM compared to the other machine learning tools is it only relies on your resources. So unlike the other systems that go elsewhere to get information, this system will only use what is in your notes, which means it doesn't make stuff up. It means it is very accurate if your notes are accurate. And if your notes are what the school wants you to know, then you're not going beyond it at a level of detail that's not required. So in this hypothetical example, I've got 4 sets of notes. I've given it to the system, and I can now start to do things. For a child that doesn't read well, but it takes in information better by audio, you can have the system generate an audio overview. So if I click that, it would take a while, but it would generate a summary of my materials. Now it does it as a podcast, as 2 people talking. Even better, that system, so if we click it, we can tell it the way we want it, the format of that presentation. We can tell it the areas we want it to cover specifically, so that it can, because it's got actually a year's worth of material there. We might only want it to focus on the 4 V's. We can also give it some additional instructions to say that, let's have a look. We'll do a deep dive. So this is just one of the syllabus dot points. Now, it's generating the audio overview. It takes a moment. So whilst it's doing that, we'll look at some of these other tools. It can also do a video in the same way, give it material in a topic, refine that, and it will generate an explainer video for your child on that topic. Likewise, we can give it a topic and tell it to do a mind map for it. We can ask it to generate a report based on our material. Or these are also, so these, the video overview and the audio overview, very good for getting a summary and studying. Mind map is just perfect for breaking down a complex topic and having it mapped out for you. Flashcards, the child doesn't have to do generate their own or go to Quizlet or any other place like that. They can upload their notes and tell it, I want you to make flashcards. You can tell it the difficulty and you can give it some guidance on where you want it to generate. You can do the same for a quiz. Very basic instructions, but it'll generate quizzes that the student can then complete. So Notebook LM, the audio overview does take a bit, so we'll move on from there. But Notebook LM is an underused resource, and where you have access to it, I highly recommend that you introduce your child to it. Many children struggle to come to grips with their notes in written form. The audio overviews are invaluable. Have it break down the topic into chunks so your child can listen to it. You can download those audio transcripts. They can listen to it on their phone. They can be on the bus, the train. They can be on a run. They can be doing whatever and still listening to it and taking in some of that information. So that is Notebook LM. When you get access to this recording, you'll be able to have a look at some of those other things that I went through. A final thing that you may want to do, and again, I'll share the link, share the file for this, is you can even use machine learning systems to generate your own custom quizzes. Now, I've done something a little more sophisticated with the example I'm going to show, but I am not a coder, to be very clear. Like I said, my background is in law and business and finalizing my master's at teaching in primary. So I'm not a coder, but I can use the systems to code solutions for me with appropriate guidance. So let's have a look at what I mean by that. So what we've got on the screen is a general purpose quizzing system that I created. I gave the prompt to, in this instance, Gemini, but I also shared the code back and forth with GPT. I asked it to build a quizzing system. Now, I didn't want it to just work once. So I told it I wanted it to be able to take an upload file of quiz questions and display them for me. And so what I've made is the general purpose, what I call a general purpose quiz system. It takes a CSV upload file, which is just a type of Excel type file, and it imports that. They're in a certain format. It imports it in order to generate the quizzes. Now, once you've got the HTML file for this, you can give that to a machine learning system and say, here is my quizzing program. And then you give it your notes and go, here are my notes. Break the notes down into this CSV format so I can upload it, and the system will understand what you mean, and it will take your notes and it will break it into the number of questions with the right number of options, and then you can do what we're about to do now. So we choose a file. Here I'm just going to use a question set I created for one of my Masters of Teaching subjects. So it's on educational psychology. I'm just going to call it test. I load it. Now notice what it's done. In my question set, as I was preparing for my exam a while ago, I had 285 questions. I've then got the system to be able to say, do you want to study for a bit, so 10-minute practice, or do you want to do a long practice? So let's just show an example of that. We start the quiz, and then it's just asking you the questions based on what you've already done. Now, I'm just going to not even worry about, see how it's now telling you the correct answer for each of them. So I'm not guessing any of these right. Surely at some point statistically I have to get something right. There we go. Just quickly step through it. So I'm not even reading the questions to get it right here. We are up to 8. It's a timed quiz, so it is actually trying to speed practice them, and the child should be able to work at 1 minute per multiple choice. In fact, half a minute is how I train when I'm tutoring students. There we go. So then it gives the summary to the student, and you can go back to the menu. Now, the interesting thing about this tool that I made, now remember I'm not a coder, is it will record the attempts, and it will also keep a history. As long as it's loaded in the browser, it'll keep a history of which questions out of the 285 it has presented to the child, and it will show the history of, okay, they've got one presentation and they didn't get it right. So that is an example of how the system, how you can use machine learning systems to also just create custom quiz sets in order to help your child. Now, we will share you that file so that you can play around with it and add template CSV. That'll come in the slide deck. In conclusion then, rushing through it, I am running a tiny bit late. You need to train your child to use AI systems responsibly. I've given you a whole bunch of use cases which are quite practical, and you could use tomorrow to help your child with their assignments, to help them understand things. But first and most important, you need to verify the responses that it's producing, because remember, it's a probabilistic system. It guesstimates. Use it to assist the child, not replace. Explain to the child how the system works, and explain to them that what you're trying to do is help them become an independent learner. So we don't want them to take shortcuts, because it'd be like knowing that you need to run a marathon, but having someone else run on the treadmill for you in the training period. That person will get fit, but you won't. Same here. They need to develop the mental skills to be able to operate independently, because when it gets to the high stakes exam, whatever it might be, there will be no ML system there for them. Help them understand as well plagiarism and Ness's all my own work policy. They will not get away with it forever. I do know from my own children that there are many schools where the students are talking amongst themselves, saying that they're using ML to write their assignments, and sure, sometimes it can avoid detection, but you cannot avoid it forever, and you can't avoid it in a closed book test. It does not help our children if they cannot understand the concept themselves. Also help them understand that, and this is a hard one, because as a parent, my children don't always like school or don't like all the subjects. You need to help them understand that what we're trying to have them develop is curiosity and a willingness to learn, and which can go into the rest of their life. So it doesn't matter whether they like that subject specifically. How do they learn to learn? Or in other words, meta learning. That's the skill we're trying to teach them, because that allows them to be a lifelong learner. What can you take away then as a parent? Understand the technology at a high level. You'll get access to this video on our YouTube channel. You'll get access to the slides. Look at it again, because I've gone over it at a fast pace. Have a look at it. Look at how the prompts. Jump on the systems yourself and test yourself. Use it for work. The more you use it, the better you'll get. So understand the technology at a high level, what it works for and where it is deficient. Explain to your child, and repeatedly explain, the importance of them doing the work for their future. Engage in conversation with them when they're doing work. So if they show you this finished product, ask them, how did you get to here? Show me the prompts you use to get there. Show me how you use the system to check your work. So you can hold them accountable by stepping through the process. It doesn't take more than 5 to 10 minutes in a parent-child interview, but it is invaluable for holding them accountable. Focus on the process. You want to work on their metacognition here. What did you learn from this process? What would you do differently? And you can change your question. So you gave it that prompt. How would we do it differently? How could we vary the prompt to get a different output? How could we test ourselves better? Have them think about the process that they're engaging with the system, so that they're just not mindlessly plugging in the text and getting a response and copying and pasting it elsewhere, or as some children are doing, pasting it into another machine learning system and saying, can you rewrite this so it's not detectable, right? Some children are doing that. So you want them to say, right, you've got an output, how did you write it in your own words, or how might you do that? And finally, model curiosity. As parents, our children always think that we are behind in technology. That is not always the case. We need to show them that even if we are behind in technology, that we're curious to learn, because by modeling curiosity, we're showing them that it's okay to not know everything, and it's okay to try to learn. And by showing them how we engage with new materials, we're modeling for them how to acquire new skills and to be patient with frustration and failure, all of which are important skills for them to develop resilience. And resilience is what gives them the ability to bounce back from potentially a failure in a subject or getting a bad essay mark, etc. So show them that you can be curious too. In the meantime, please, it would be very helpful if you could complete a survey on this seminar. Obviously, I understand that the audio was broken on it, so that is known and we'll try and fix it. But if you could give a survey on both your understanding of machine learning, what you learned, what could have been done better, that would be really helpful. Always welcome a Google review if you found it helpful. Look forward to hopefully doing additional workshops for you in the future. We do have a question there if you want to learn something else to help your child. We're very happy to run sessions. Again, thank you so much for your time tonight.